Good afternoon, all. Welcome to this session, which is entitled The Sustainability Vacuum. Is the Green Agenda Falling Behind? If you didn't see me earlier, I'm Doug Drinkwater from Hot Topics, and I'm joined by John Townsend, who is the CIO at the National Trust. Morley Tikawal is an IT Director, and we have Owen O'Connell, who is the CIO at the Nurture Group, and Emily Watson-Breeze, who is a go-to-market lead for sustainability at BT. So what are we going to discuss today? Well, I think, first of all, a major theme throughout this whole day has been AI. I find it somewhat bemusing that we talk a lot about AI and not necessarily the kind of impact from a green perspective. So I think we'll tackle that dichotomy, if you will. We'll look into sustainability, accountability and leadership. Who actually owns sustainability top down? What does that mean for CIOs as well? I think increasingly CIOs aren't always in the picture in setting those strategies. John might be a rare exception to that, but not always is the case. And collectively, how do we as an industry do more, collaborate effectively to drive change? And I think we will tackle a little bit the role of vendors and in particular the hyperscalers who are going through their own challenges at the moment on that front. So as before, any questions, do raise your hand. Comments are strictly prohibited, so no comments, please. We do also have an ESG supergroup, which we're launching later on to discuss how we can do more as a community. And I can see Richard and a few others who are part of that. If anyone else wants to join, let me know after this session. I'm going to start with a general kind of broad question, which you can all answer. Keep the answers fairly short if you can, and then we'll be a bit more targeted. But John, starting with you, how have you seen that kind of ESG sustainability agenda change over the last year? Because it's still frustrating. We've had a lot of these conversations for, it seems like an eternity. Are we actually making any progress?
I think, speaking from my own organisation, it's always been top of the agenda. So we're blessed from that perspective. But I think more broadly, we are seeing, we saw what was going on in Scotland and the challenges around meeting targets that were self-set in that way. I think the thing I'm noticing more when I talk with people about this is that we've done all the easy stuff. And actually the things that we do next are actually really quite challenging. And so meeting targets is going to become harder and harder. And, it's going to be almost the sort of 80-20 rule about it's going to take 80% of the effort to get the last 20%. There's still an awful long way to go. But I think, organisations are taking it seriously. But one of the challenges that we see with, the new hype around, particularly the large language models and what have you, is that they are power-hungry beasts. And, I spent, I think, the last decade moaning about the number of photographs people store on cloud storage and never actually look at them. How much poetry do you actually need to create on a large language model, before we realise that that's not the best use of scarce resources?
Yeah, apparently I saw some research on this. A single ChatGPT query consumes nearly 10 times the electricity of Google search. So I'm sure we'll explore some of that later on. Molly, how about yourself? How have you seen this? Has it fallen off the agenda, or are we still having the right kind of conversations?
I think we are definitely slower than what we anticipated. If you talk about Green Deal and things companies promised or businesses promised, right? I feel we are behind. However, I see the momentum going on. So we are on the right path. It's just somehow I feel that it's not just businesses' responsibility. It's to do with people behavior and engagement, or lack of understanding what they can do to improve the situation, right? So yes, we are behind, but on right track. So with people like us doing more and educating more and talking more about what can be done, specific actions, that would definitely bring us back on track. For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm probably in the same camp as John, working for a national landscaping company, and our strapline is making Britain a more beautiful and safer place, because we've done the Royal Parks and Olympic Park, managing and maintaining of that. But the green agenda is always on our track. We need to be there. And me personally, from Ireland, green hat on. I like to be leaving something behind for the future generations. There is a bit of greenwashing and paying a little bit of lip service to the green agenda. It's like, oh, we all have to do it. Let's just tick that box. Whether we're living and breathing it is another thing. But it's like the sustainability, ESG versus AI. Whereas our focus, definitely AI and all that has got everybody focused differently, has changed agendas, but do they enhance each other? Do they complement each other? Or are they working in poles apart? In some areas, they're working poles apart. When you talk about data centers consuming so much more power, Japan are going to triple their consumption of power, and I'm sure it's the same for any data center done because of the AI-generated queries that are happening. But then at the same time, we're using AI within Nurture to optimize and use things better. So if we're gritting and cutting grass in half a county with the number of vehicles, we'll know the best routes to take. So we're traveling less, using less of a workforce. So we're doing it. It's benefiting us. But absolutely, we still need to stay focused on the ESG. We're aiming for B Corp, so we're accountable for achieving that anyway. So we have to tick those boxes.
Emily, how do you see it from a kind of BT perspective? How have you seen that agenda change over the last 12 months?
I mean, in my role, I'm obviously talking to customers all of the time who are trying to accelerate their net zero journey. So it's incredibly prevalent in my role. But I think more so than that, we've seen a huge increase in the number of customers proactively coming to us and saying, look, how can you help us from a networks point of view, from a device point of view? What strategies have you got in place? And then we've seen it expand not only in terms of the technology that we provide and how we can help them from that side on the networking front, but more holistically to, we really like what you've been doing. We see that you've been decarbonising your estate. We see that you're using some of your telephone boxes and making them into EV charging hubs. How did that come about? What was involved in that process? How can we go on a similar journey? So from the conversations that I've been having, I definitely think it's something that's still got a lot of momentum, a lot of traction. But I do appreciate that maybe in the wider media sphere, if you like, it slips slightly. I mean, I think you were talking about the hype cycle earlier. I think sustainability, ESG topics have all been replaced or are being slightly usurped, if you like, by Gen AI and the opportunities, but also the drawbacks that will bring. But I do think, in part, that's because more companies are looking inwardly. They're thinking, okay, we've done that first critical step. We've got our targets in place for net zero. They've been approved in some cases by Science Based Targets initiative. That's excellent. Now we actually have to meet them. So we might not hear quite as much about it, but definitely from like the internal workings, still seeing that action going ahead.
Yeah. I want to come on to the tech ecosystem and that impact that we've described at the start. But I think, John, you were on our session last October at the studio, and I think I mentioned then at the time, certainly ESG has become quite politicised in a way. And then obviously politically, if you look at what the UK government has done, they rode back on quite a lot of green promises. So how much of this is a political hot potato that actually is having longer term ramifications for society?
Well, I think obviously we're in a pre-election period, and as a charity we can't give any views on that sort of political side of things. But speaking as a personal individual, yes, it has been politicised, but probably not enough. Mm-hmm. If we look at what is being talked about currently on the political agenda, actually it's quite low down. And things like, the restoration of nature in this country is not high on the political agenda. What we need to think about, I suppose, over the coming weeks is how does that get escalated and actually become part of the debate? Because it's something that, particularly we see with children and young people, there is a lot of climate anxiety out there. And so actually getting that raised on the agenda, it was something that will benefit us all over the next few weeks.
Yeah, fantastic. Any questions in the room at this point? Yes, we can get a microphone.
Afternoon, panel. So, sustainability, ESG, it's not just decarbonisation and, more green-focused stuff. There's 17 other goals. So which are going to be the most important sort of going forward? And here's a question: how can we use tech and AI to help us with any of those? Thank
I'm happy to have a first go at that, is which ones of those goals are going to mean that there is no planet for humans to habitat as a habitat? Yeah. And if you answer that question, then you've probably answered things. So that's why it is. But there's more than one aspect to it. We've also got to consider all the other aspects as well, because they are important. But from speaking from my organisation perspective, the restoration of nature, and I don't just mean making it a little bit better. I mean putting it into a state where it's actually going to be sustainable for the future of the planet, and therefore for the future of the people who live on said planet. Because let's not forget, the planet is going to be ultimately be fine until such point as the sun expands and swallows it up. It's us having to live on it that's the problem. And so that's why it's important that everybody, tackles this. But it doesn't mean, therefore, you can exclude and ignore all of the other aspects of that. One of the big challenges that I see, for example, is the inequality of access to nature and green space. It is terrible in some communities. In our country, and we were talking before about Birmingham, inner city Birmingham is absolutely devoid of green space and nature. How do we tackle that sort of challenge? Because more and more people are going to be living in those urban spaces as we go forward, and we've got to really think about, for people's social well-being, from an inclusivity perspective, and making sure that everyone has equal access to nature in the future.
We say it's Fujitsu, we say we're a regenerative organisation, it's in our purpose. What do you think of, rather than trying to sort of squeeze carbon, which we need to do, and get rid of chemicals, which we need to do, and make people happy and get close to nature, what do we think about that sort of circular economy and the regeneration?
I'm absolutely supportive, but I think Emily's probably going to be way better to talk about circularity, because I've seen some of the stuff that BT are doing, and it's one of the things we're immensely proud of being a customer, is actually how much effort they're putting into that circularity work.
Yeah, thank you, John. I'd just say from a tech point of view, the absolute best thing you can do is keep your resources in play for as long as possible. So not only when you're creating your own products, but also when you're choosing who to partner with, choosing who to procure from, making sure that they share that goal is so immensely important, because there are some wonderful end-of-life practices out there, and we partner with some incredibly important companies who are really working hard to scale up their processes, and that's excellent. But ultimately, we need to be reducing the amount of resources that we need to mine or, procure in the first place. So it's great, end of life, you've got that sorted, but we need to keep those resources in circulation. They need to have a second, a third, a fourth life, and they need to be acting in different ways. So making sure that all across that value chain, you're not being wasteful. I mean, it goes into what John was also saying about the social side of sustainability. At the beginning of that supply chain, there is such a risk of human rights abuses if you're having to mine all of these resources. That is just obviously something that we need to mitigate very, very quickly. And a very easy way of doing that is reusing the resources that we have. I mean, we do lots of tech amnesties now, and it's absolutely awful. But I remember I went home and I said to my mum, who's a bit of a technophobe and won't get rid of anything for security reasons, give me your old mobile phones, give me your old laptop, I'm going to take them to a tech amnesty. She came out with about 7 different devices. It was just absolutely shocking. And I said, Mum, these could have been reused. The resources in here are really, really important. So whether it's in your business, in your offices, or whether it's at home, there will be this bank of resources that we need to use. And it's actually, it's beneficial financially as well. So definitely circularity, incredibly important.
I'm going to do a short plug actually whilst on that point, but many of you would have been here earlier. We announced our partnership with Good Things Foundation, who are in the room today, and they're helping to recycle and refurbish old technology. So find us at the end if you want to find out more on that. But I've got a load of other questions, but don't let me hog the mic. Have we got any other questions in the room? It's a small crowd, so I can start picking on people, if not. At the back, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Stand it on. Hi, I'm Alpesh Toshi. I've worked in sustainability for about 4 years, and I'm a technologist. One of the things I've seen over the last 4 years within IT departments is actually apathy and actually doing anything. There's been a lot of talk about IT sustainability and looking at how you can reduce the emissions across the IT estate. So, as an example, one large organization, very large global organization in financial services, was looking at how they can reduce the emissions across their data centers, amongst other things. But the reality that I've seen is actually the execution of that just has not happened. And this conversation happened 2 years ago. And nothing, very little has happened. And if you then go across lots of other organizations, there really isn't a lot of activity, initiatives, budget to deliver that outcome. What have you seen across the industry actually doing something around IT sustainability as part of a sustainability initiative within the organizations?
Can I take that?
Yeah.
Brilliant one. Earlier in one of the talks, I was just talking about it, that have you, in IT organizations, I've seen similar trends. My experience within Johnson Controls as well as Orchard Hill, everywhere, IT people, do they actually know what they can do on this agenda? What I did within my teams is enabled KPIs related to sustainability. So you have to kind of introduce measures by which they can do some activities and you're going to measure it as part of their performance. And that has worked well. I'll give you one small example, that introducing ESG impact assessment and documenting it as part of the scoping or requirements document before the project gets approved is the mandatory step. So I introduced that within all the projects my team was working on. And that enabled that understanding that, oh, if I'm deploying a server, what energy consumption is going to go up, what it converts into CO2 emission. And I was able to build that calculator where you can clearly see. So I think things like that, and tied to their performance, that have you achieved reduction of XYZ by this %, then yes, you are exceeding, etc. So I think one of the ways to tackle that is that, and then continuously educating them. I think that's another, what activities actually can impact the actual CO2 emission, for an example, for their site or for their office. So yeah, and upskilling around the sustainability technologies is another thing, and working with the vendors like BT who are asking us that, are you using renewable energies or not while you are manufacturing your product? So there are multiple things, but specifically to your question is introducing KPIs or performance management kind of tools around this.
Just to actually want to ask a question to the gentleman who asked that question. That apathy, does it come, do you think, from the team members themselves, the culture, or is it more holistic around the business and how it views sustainability? What's your view?
I've talked to lots of organizations, large ones, around the sustainability agenda. The challenge in large organizations that I've seen is the sustainability agenda is fragmented. You have chief sustainability officers who have no relationship with the CIO at all. And they don't really understand what the emissions profile of the IT estate would look like. And let's be honest, so one of the world's largest banks, as an example, 25% of all their emissions are in their data centers. Right. Huge footprint, but nobody really knows that. We work, one of the things we do is work with a partner who sells into them. And the challenge has been, number one, sustainability is not being driven by business people. No disrespect to sustainability, if there are any in the room, but I've spoken to a lot of them. Most of them are marketing people, comms people, internal comms people. They're not technologists or data people or IT people. And so what you get is they don't really understand the footprint. That's what I've seen. Secondly, sorry, yes?
I could just add to that. Part of ours is ESG and sustainable agenda was to go cloud-based, cloud-first adoption, so getting rid of servers on site, because you'd expect that the Azures and the AWSs and the Google Clouds can do it a lot more efficient doing ourselves. And we've shifted the problem, but then what we're seeing in the news is they're not doing good as job as they should be doing it, and AI generation is so it's generating so much power execution. So we're having to check our supply chain. But is that going to shift our behavior to going from AWS to Google? I don't think so. And then the same thing, our supply chain, people who are coming to ourselves, they're doing our due diligence on ourselves as to what we're doing and how we're providing services. So unless we tick those relevant boxes, we won't get their business. So I feel we're doing it as a company.
Yeah.
We're shifting the problem to somebody else, but yeah.
So you're talking about scope 3. So interestingly, one of the things that we did in one of my companies, I run an investment firm in one of my companies, we went to all the vendors to say, can you tell us the embodied carbon of all the kit that you sell? So let's take Dell as the example. So if you go to Dell's website, they actually have a bunch of a sheet telling you what the embodied carbon of it is. The reality of that is, if you go and look at these things, and all the big vendors have done it in Silicon Valley, so HP has one and Cisco has it, the emissions calculations for embodied carbon, which is scope 3 if you buy a Dell kit, is about 60% out, because it's all estimated. There's no real numbers in there, because frankly, Dell and HP and all the other vendors can't actually accurately calculate what their emissions are. So even if you get that data, that's one of the biggest problems, is actually collecting the data across the IT estate and the cloud estate to actually accurately have what the emissions look like. Nobody knows, honestly. Oh, yeah. And the vendors don't want you to know. Yeah. Honestly, the big cloud, the hyperscalers don't want you to know. They make it really hard.
There is a thing in that, and it's one of the reasons why we want to start this ESG group, is because actually, if you then exercise your buying rights to the more transparent organisations that do try and actually calculate the data around their own scope 3 emissions, then that's got to be a good thing, right? Because ultimately, if everybody starts behaving in that way and saying, right, do you know what, yeah, we are going to only go through acquisition and procurement activities with the best in class, that will change behaviours. It won't happen overnight, but it will start to change behaviours over time.
I do want to come on to that buyer criteria in a moment, and perhaps Emily, get your thoughts on that. But I think we had a question, gentleman in the front there.
Yeah, I think probably he touched upon that about the scope 3, right? So how do you influence your vendors? I mean, it could be IT, it could be your procurement vendors. How do you influence to get better at that? And then I think one of the problems in the industry is right now consistency of the framework. How do you collect the scope 3 data, which is quite difficult to collect, and everybody is just, I think, guesstimating, right, rather than getting to the real numbers.
Yeah, I think the session, John, we were on last October, where we had Dom Housen from Viridor, and he was speaking about the lack of quality of data and this almost cottage industry emerging of people validating data upon validating data, and no one knows really what the accurate picture, I guess, looks like. Morley, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think there are more and more technologies coming in the market, if you look out for them, around how to make those calculations accurate. But the fundamental problem is what and how. So data around scope 2, scope 3, what data and how would you validate it, where it's coming from, right? So there are some technologies in the market which are coming, software companies who are launching certain products which would help you. Another thing which I did is working with organizations who specializes in such topics like Gartner. So I worked with them to develop those internal KPIs for different function. So that did help develop that understanding, scope 2, just not for us, but scope 3, and what questions you need to ask to your suppliers, what data you need to collect, etc. And then look out for the product which would help you measure that as accurately as currently possible. It is going to evolve, but it's kind of working better than before, yeah. I must say.
Do you think any regulation on making it more standardized will help the industry?
That should be the first step, to be honest with you, because most hyped subject is sustainability, or one of the most hyped, right? But what and why? There is a lack of definition around lots of words in that subject, as well as what data and what would be acceptable, what won't be, what is accurate, what is the data source. So some sort of standardization and benchmarking or developing baseline, that would definitely be helpful. I think North America has done a little bit around that in their legislation. Probably I'm hoping we will see that soon as well in next couple of years.
I want to come on to that regulations, carrot or stick approach, perhaps in due course, and procurement. If we get time, the CIO's role in all of this as well. But we've got a question in the middle. Keep it quick if we can.
Yeah, very quick. We focus a lot on the data and the governance. That is kind of on the right side of things, of our, that part of our circle. And Dan lies in statistics. What can we do at the generative element of it, at the coding side, the things that we're building for the future? Because that's ultimately going to feed our next version of the circle. There was just to help put context, the capability aspect, which is so DevOps, for example, is known to be a sustainable approach. So what else can we do as organisations in our capabilities to fix for the future, not just monitor how terrible things are?
Good question.
Maybe I can help a little bit. I'm not an expert, but the way I see is there are things, small things, but it would have big impact. So DevOps, you just gave one example. Another example I would give is power management, for an example. So everybody who's working in the office or at home office, whatever it is, if you explain that switching off when you are not using it would save XYZ certain amount of energy. And the biggest or the most important part is converting it into a standard way of looking at data. It should be CO2 emission. So what percentage of your CO2 emission can be reduced by doing such activities? So I would say pick up small areas, but which have got, or smaller tasks or activities, which would have bigger impact rather than straightforward going to scope 3 discussions, I think. Of course, that is important, but once you control scope 1, scope 2, you are making that good progress. And then, of course, you can look at scope 3. But power management is another thing you can look into. There are multiple examples like that.
And even understanding the elasticity of the platforms, it's a good way to save money and also to reduce carbon. So when you're not talking about peak times on, your web platforms and what have you, actually kill the environments. Don't even just power them off, get rid of them, because that's a way you're reducing your costs as well as doing good for the environment.
Can I move on to leadership then? I think we mentioned chief sustainability officers. And John, we've spoken before around, I guess, your role and working with head of estates on sustainability. There's some research from Accenture that I think only 49% of CIOs are actively involved with the wider leadership team in setting sustainability goals. So is there a risk, per the title, that the CIO kind of gets a little bit left behind on all of this? I'm going to come to you first, and then Owen, I'll come to you.
Yeah, so I think one of the big areas in many organisations, I mean, you talked about in the financial services, is IT is going to be a big for all scope emissions. There will be a big net emitter within organisations, depending on which sector that will be, higher or lower. So I think regardless of whether the CIO is leading for it, the CIO should be given very firm targets. I think back to your KPI points, and held accountable for it. I have targets for IT within my organisation, and they're absolutely fixed, and I know how much I've got to reduce by in what time scale. So whoever it is that is accountable for setting those targets in an organisation, don't forget about the IT department. And if the IT department isn't given those targets, actually by communicating the benefit they can deliver, we should be encouraging as a community them to go and find the target and actually setting a good example in that way.
Yeah, Owen?
Yeah, so within our organisation, we have our own E-team, our ESG team, and I'm very much involved in that, helping to drive the IT agenda in it. We've no targets as yet. A lot of our targets, as we said earlier on, I shifted the problem, taking servers off site. So I'm doing my bit, I'm ticking my box, and hopefully AWS and Azure are doing their job. A lot of my remit is falling down to it's not just my agenda from an ESG point of view. I'm trying to change behaviour in the company and education. So if we can do that, we've 3,000 people work for the company, and is security just my job? No, it's everybody's role. Is ESG my role? It's everybody's role. Same thing, like telling your mum to bring in our we've done the exact same thing at Amnesty. We won't name and shame them. Printing, don't be printing. We've saved tens of thousands on printing and shifting it, and we're not printing, we're saving the company money. Again, shutting off things at night time, all those good things. And then again, I spoke about it earlier on about the efficiencies. Technology in our organization is really driving efficiencies with less carbon emissions, and also route optimization solutions. So we're doing some very innovative stuff.
The other thing I have seen is some CIOs and CTOs having sustainability goals as part of their bonus, which I guess
incentive.
Even if you don't care about this stuff, I guess you should do.
I was going to say that.
We do have a question in the audience here, and Rich, I'm going to pick on you because you've been on a few of these sessions at the studio. Come on, ask them a contentious question. Let's get a few debates going. But for now, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Doug. Thanks all. It's interesting what you talk about there around shared ownership of some of those sustainability targets. I'm Angela from Good Things Foundation. We run the National Device Bank. And as part of that, what we often find is that we'll have a brilliant conversation with an ESG lead who'll be super committed to donated end-of-life employee devices into the National Device Bank. The barrier is often when that goes to the CIO or the CTO, very risk averse, they don't want that data leaving the building, despite us working with a trusted refurb partner, despite us being able to get those devices at whatever point the organisation is comfortable with that. It's often meaning that those devices never get in the hands of people who need them, or that it's such a long incubation period that that's an immense resource cost for us as a charity. How do you see that working within that shared agenda that you talk about there?
I think one answer, if possible, for one person.
I could hit as well. You know, what was happening in our organisation before I came along is they were bringing it down to the local tip and putting it into the yes, don't quote me on that. But that was what's happening. Literally, it's the easiest way to do it. So at least now when we go through and we'll wipe it down. So we are doing that with a local charity, and it's ticking the box from an ESG point of view, but also from you know, CSR as well.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Yeah, Richard, come on. Let's see what you got.
Yeah, thanks for that. I've been called out by the teacher. I really like the conversation, and what's sort of emerging in my mind is almost like concentric circles of influence that we as tech leaders can have. There's, you know, just switching things off, you know, what should be real basics in the middle, and then there's more that we can do with our sort of peers around the rest of the organisation, and then what can we do as leaders, as a leadership community, to be really front and centre. And I just sort of had a thought, and I may express this slightly clumsily, and I'm not trying to sort of force an equivalence here, but there are some parts of the conversation that sound similar to discussions about diversity and inclusion that we've been probably having for longer, actually. And I'm just wondering if there's anything, firstly, you know, do you see those similarities? And secondly, is there anything that we can learn from that as leaders about things that we think we've done well to promote diversity and inclusion, and things that maybe didn't go quite so well? And if I just sort of, I guess, make that slightly more concrete. For example, in my last organisation that I left about 12 months ago, we had 12 staff groups around all sorts of different dimensions of diversity and inclusion. We didn't have a sustainability one. So that may be a very sort of tactical manifestation, but I guess my general question is, do you see parallels in the conversations that you're having? And what do you think the lessons are from that sort of recent history?
One person take it.
Well, I can absolutely say there is a parallel, and we've actually used that as an approach, because if you think, how did those shifts change in inclusion, diversity, and equality? They started with the fact that, you know, there was an injustice identified, legislation was put in place that led to organisations actually setting those as strategic ambitions and goals, and actually it started then to shift the culture within the organisations. The one bit that was missing in that, I think, though, was clear targets, and that was something that, you know, somehow wasn't as sort of clear around organisations. Is, well, what are we going to sign up to actually achieve from an EDI perspective? And it's the same thing with sustainability. So if we do shift that and say, right, okay, it is a strategic ambition, we're going to shift the culture to one where the organisation as a whole, to your point, you know, this is everyone's business, gives a damn about it and is willing to actually step up. But they're also given clear targets. And then the how, creating the groups, exactly, you know, whether we call those communities of interest or support groups or whatever that is, but purely based around those different elements of sustainability and what are we going to do about it. We've had some amazing ideas come up from all different parts of the organisations about how we could raise our game, from, you know, whether it's about tackling carbon or reuse or whatever that is. Some really great stuff, and they're not the type of things you'll identify and think of if you're just approaching it from a sustainability lead in a top-down way.
my final question before I get the kind of top tips from everyone moving forward. Emily, from a vendor perspective, I mean, I think Owen's mentioned the hyperscalers, for example. We saw Microsoft the other day that they've got this carbon negative by 2030. They've seen the emissions grow by 30% since 2020 and last year. How do you see the responsibility in this field of the vendor community of hyperscalers? Because clearly this takes a joined effort, isn't it? An industry effort to actually drive change.
Absolutely. I think the partnerships that we have with our suppliers, vendors, critically important. And I think this messaging that we have around, go into a shared space and it's not your problem anymore, or like go with us and provide, someone provides a service and we consume it, therefore it's not in our emissions profile anymore, could be accurate, could be true. It's then somebody else's problem technically. But if we're thinking in a more like communal way, we should not be approaching it like that, because of course the emissions aren't magically disappearing just because they're not on your reporting sheet. They're still there. They're still having a very real and very negative impact. That goes for resource use, for whatever it might be. But yeah, onto that emissions tech usage side, don't kind of, I guess, offset your emissions by giving it to somebody else would be my advice. I know it's a lot harder said than done, and it's a real selling point to be able to go to somebody else who will absorb those emissions. But I think if you can find another alternative solution, that would be probably preferable.
Excellent. And then final tips, John, I'm going to kind of lead you where I want you to go in a way as the carrot or stick. Regulations coming in the EU in particular. You either take the opportunity to do this in many ways, or you're going to get the painful repercussions afterwards. What would your kind of top tip to the audience be in doing something practical, moving the dial?
I think that create that sense of movement within an organisation, make this an important thing, because everybody in an organisation can have a positive impact or a negative impact. Yeah, so I like the idea about, actually setting it within people's performance objectives and things like that. Make it everybody's business.
Yes.
And then we'll start to see a change, because we're going to see, there's a generation coming into the workplace now who really do give a damn about this stuff and have significant levels of anxiety about this stuff. And they're going to start demanding that. And they will choose which employers they take their skills and talent to based on what they're doing about it. So, get on board.
May I add one thing? Sorry, I was very excited about the point. So I hired a couple of IT graduates in my team, okay? So not just talking about what we can do, I assigned one task to one IT graduate that come up with one task for everybody in the local office where you can actually show me that it worked. One thing, this new person, and they are full of energy, new ideas, etc. He came to the office and he did announce through emails that whoever wears the same clothes most of the times in the office in a month and don't buy any clothes for 1 month will be kind of awarded XYZ, a free lunch or whatever it was, right? That was such a brilliant idea. It has got nothing to do with my business or my company. But lots of people turned up in the similar or same T-shirts and outfits for a month, and that became a tradition. So you're talking about a circularity here, that you're not going to throw away those clothes because you want to go for fast fashion. Yes.
BO wasn't a problem, no.
No. So I think those kind of inclusion, to your point as well, include the new generations. They're passionate, genuinely passionate about it, not ticking the boxes, including my kids. If you tell them, if you send one slice of bread, throw it away, it is going to consume XYZ amount of oil or gas. So I think
very quickly, we went last two.
Just controversially, let's face it, the world is screwed. The capitalists, the way we're burning things, and I love my kids actually. The way they actually go down to local they call it the vintage shop, and it's the charity shop. So they buy the clothes and they reuse them, and they're in fashion. So I love that, and they care about these things. But the world is screwed. It really is. If the money that was going into arms went into sustainability, but we're not going to change Putin and these guys on this. It's a pity the way the money is being diverted a wrong way. But all we can do is what's in my control. What can I do? What can I influence? So I can influence my family. I can influence my peers at work and make it. It's not just IT's job, it's my colleagues, and you tell them turn off that frigging computer when you go home in the evening.
I think the world is screwed. It's a good title for this. Emily, finally from you.
I'm going for a slightly more optimistic approach, I hope. I think collaboration is absolutely key. Education and awareness. we can't get enough of it, whether it's internally within your own organisations. If all of us here today could really be advocates for that, if you could go back tomorrow and say what you'd learnt, especially on the ESG front, that'd be amazing. You know, as a partner, we have a responsibility externally to upskill and to educate the people within our wider network as well. So, you know, there's obviously intellectual property and there's certain things that I wouldn't want to share about our practices because they're important to us and they're beneficial to us. But none of us are actually doing this alone. You know, some of those very traditional gatekeeping business practices really do have to be thrown out because it's the world we're talking about. It's our planet that we all live on. You know, just because I work at BT and we're doing great doesn't mean that I'm immune from the climate change catastrophe that's going on around us. So the more you can share, the more you can do, I think the absolute better.
Fantastic. Well, as a reminder, we have the ESG Supergroup launch at 4:30 Studio 3, so do seek John and myself out if you want to join that one. But for now, if everyone give a big round of applause to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.